To Rebecca, my rock, my inspiration, 15 wonderful years. James raised his champagne flute, his other arm casually draped around the waist of a woman who was definitely not me. The private dining room of La Maison fell silent, waiters freezing mid-step as our friends and family exchanged horrified glances. The young blonde beamed, completely oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding. I rose slowly from my seat, smoothing the silk of my anniversary dress, the one I'd spent weeks finding for this special occasion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Quite the performance, James, I said, my voice steady despite the volcanic rage beneath. But I think proper introductions are in order. I gestured to the blonde. Everyone, meet Amber, my husband's executive assistant, and apparently, much more. I turned to face our stunned guests. I'd like to thank you all for witnessing this moment, as it makes what comes next so much easier. I removed an envelope from my clutch and slid it across the table. Divorce papers, James, already filed this morning. His smug smile faltered. And effective immediately, as CEO and majority shareholder of Weston Financial Group, I'm terminating your employment. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. You can't, that's my company, my father's company, he sputtered. I smiled, the kind of smile that shows teeth but never reaches the eyes. Check your shareholder agreement. Darling, you transferred controlling interest to me 3 years ago. Too busy with your extracurricular activities to read the paperwork? I lifted my glass toward his mistress. Amber, dear, you might want to update your resume. Something tells me your position just became redundant. The evening had been meticulously planned, down to the last orchid centerpiece. 15 years of marriage to James Weston deserved a celebration that reflected our journey together. At least, that's what I believed when I reserved the garden terrace at La Maison, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. The same restaurant where James had proposed a lifetime ago. I'd spent 6 weeks coordinating everything. The custom menu featuring dishes from significant moments in our relationship, the vintage champagne from our honeymoon year, the string quartet playing our wedding song. Our closest friends and family had flown in from across the country. James's business associates, the old guard who had watched him take over his father's investment firm and transform it into a modern financial powerhouse, were seated at carefully arranged tables, their gift boxes containing commemorative watches I'd had engraved with our anniversary date. The first sign something was wrong came when James texted he'd be fashionably late to our own anniversary dinner. Closing an important deal, he'd written. Start without me. I'd maintained my composure, made excuses to our 40 guests, and rearranged the evening's timeline. By the time the main course was cleared and still no James, the pitying glances from our friends had become unbearable. Then, just as dessert was being served, he arrived, with Amber Phillips on his arm. Amber, the 27-year-old executive assistant he'd hired last spring. Amber, whose marketing degree hadn't explained her sudden promotion to special projects coordinator with an office adjoining my husband's. Amber, wearing a dress that cost more than a month's mortgage on our first home. The room's atmosphere transformed instantly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. My mother reached for my hand under the table. James's father, Richard, straightened in his chair, his expression darkening as he watched his son guide the young woman to the empty seat beside him, the seat reserved for my sister, who'd graciously relocated when she saw what was happening. Sorry I'm late, everyone, James announced, seemingly oblivious to the tension. The Peterson merger ran long, but it's going to put us on the map in Chicago. He beamed, accepting a glass of champagne from a waiter whose professional mask couldn't quite hide his discomfort. This calls for a toast. That's when he stood, raising his glass with practiced charm, and delivered the line that would change everything. To Rebecca, my rock, my inspiration, 15 wonderful years. The words hung in the air, a perfect crystallization of his breathtaking audacity. This man, who had brought his mistress to our anniversary celebration, was toasting me while his other arm remained wrapped around her waist. As if the insult weren't enough, he'd chosen to deliver it as a performance, with all the important people in our lives as his audience. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart. That had been fracturing in slow motion for years as James's behavior grew increasingly dismissive. No. What broke was the dam holding back 15 years of accumulated realizations, suspicions, and carefully suppressed fury. In that moment, as champagne glinted under crystal chandeliers and our guests sat in horrified silence, I saw everything with perfect clarity. The constant late nights at the office, the business trips that multiplied after Amber joined the company, the declining balance in our joint accounts despite record profits at Weston Financial. Most importantly, I remembered the paperwork James had carelessly signed 3 years ago, documents my attorney had carefully drafted when I executed my own silent partnership in several venture capital investments that had quietly grown into the controlling interest in his family's company. James, too busy chasing the next deal, and evidently, the next young assistant, had never bothered to read the details of what he was signing. As I rose from my chair, I felt strangely calm. The room around me seemed to move in slow motion, James's self-satisfied smile, Amber's oblivious happiness, the collective held breath of our guests. I had rehearsed variations of this moment in my mind for months, ever since I'd discovered the hotel receipts, the duplicate gifts, the text messages James hadn't bothered to hide well enough. "Quite the performance, James," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The rest flowed naturally, the introduction of Amber to our guests, the revelation of the divorce filing, and finally, the bombshell that transformed his expression. From dismissive annoyance to horrified realization. "You can't. That's my company, my father's company." He sputtered, champagne pooling around the shattered glass at his feet. Richard Weston, James's father and former CEO, slowly nodded as understanding dawned across his weathered face. He'd warned his son years ago about the risks of treating the business like a personal playground rather than the multi-generational legacy it was meant to be. Now, he watched his son's empire crumble in real time, brought down not by market forces but by his own arrogance. "Check your shareholder agreement, darling," I said, allowing myself the smallest smile. "You transferred controlling interest to me 3 years ago? Too busy with your extracurricular activities to read the paperwork?" The gasp from Amber confirmed she'd understood the implications before James did. Her future, built on promises, from a man she now realized couldn't deliver, was evaporating before her eyes. I lifted my glass toward her, the perfect picture of composure despite the earthquake reshaping my world. "Amber, dear, you might want to update your resume. Something tells me your position just became redundant." The envelope containing the divorce papers lay between us on the white tablecloth, a bridge between my past life and whatever came next. As conversation erupted around us, shocked exclamations, nervous laughter, urgent whispers, I remained standing, finally seeing my husband clearly for perhaps the first time in our marriage. James Weston, the golden boy of Boston finance, had just discovered the true cost of underestimating his wife, and judging by the pallor spreading across his face, the price was far higher than he'd ever imagined possible. The champagne in my glass tasted bitter as I took a small sip, my throat constricting against the bubbles. Despite my outward composure, my hand trembled slightly, the liquid rippling in tiny concentric circles. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out the hushed murmurs that now filled the private dining room. I had imagined this confrontation countless times over the past months. In my mind, it had been clean, surgical, a precise extraction of myself from James's life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But standing here, watching his face cycle through shock, confusion, and the first dangerous flickers of anger, I felt the full weight of 15 years crashing down. "Rebecca," he hissed, finally finding his voice as he gripped the edge of the table. "We need to discuss this privately." His gaze darted nervously to his father, then to his business partners, calculating the damage in real time. "I believe we're past the point of private discussions," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. My body felt disconnected, as if I were watching the scene unfold from somewhere near the crystal chandelier above us. "I've had 3 years of privacy while you had, well, considerably less discretion." Amber's perfectly contoured face had drained of color. She remained frozen beside James, her champagne untouched, her eyes wide with the dawning realization that she was collateral damage in a war she hadn't known existed. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Richard Weston, my father-in-law, slowly rose from his seat, his napkin folded with precise movements that betrayed his military background. "I think," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built Weston Financial from the ground up, "that everyone except family should consider the evening concluded." The relief on the guests' faces was palpable as they began the awkward process of gathering belongings and making hushed exits. My sister caught my eye from across the room, her expression asking if I wanted her to stay. I gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. This was my battlefield now. As the room emptied, leaving only the Weston family and Amber, I became acutely aware of physical sensations I'd been suppressing. The pinch of my stilettos that had seemed so important this morning. The weight of the diamond anniversary necklace James had given me last week. Purchased, I now realized, out of guilt rather than love. The slight chill of the air conditioning raising goosebumps on my bare arms. "You've made your point, Rebecca," James said, his voice low and dangerous as the door closed behind the last departing guest. "Very theatrical. Now let's talk about what you think you're doing with my company." I noticed how he emphasized my company, as if saying it forcefully enough would make it true again. The first hint of moisture appeared along his hairline, James Weston, who prided himself on never breaking a sweat, literally or figuratively. "I'm not doing anything with the company," I replied, slowly sinking back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. "I've owned controlling interest for 3 years. Tonight is simply the night I've chosen to inform you." Across the table, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "James, who is this young woman?" She gestured toward Amber with a slight nod, her pearl earrings catching the light. Eleanor, who had perfected the art of selective blindness during 40 years of marriage to Richard, could no longer maintain the pretense. Amber shifted uncomfortably, twisting the oversized diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. A bracelet identical to the one James had given me for Christmas, claiming it was one of a kind. "Mrs. Weston, I'm Amber Phillips. I work with James on special projects for the firm." Her voice had a rehearsed quality, as if they'd practiced this introduction, though certainly not for this particular audience. "She's my executive assistant." James cut in sharply, shooting Amber a warning glance. "And Rebecca is bluffing. This is a ridiculous stunt." I reached for my clutch again, removing not just the divorce papers but a second envelope. From it, I withdrew several documents and slid them across the table to Richard. "The shareholder agreement from 3 years ago," I explained quietly, "along with verification of the transfer of controlling interest and the amendments to the corporate bylaws that James signed last spring." I paused, looking directly at my husband. "The amendments giving the majority shareholder unilateral authority to remove executives deemed harmful to the company's reputation." Richard adjusted his reading glasses, his face impassive as he reviewed the documents. 40 years building one of Boston's most respected financial firms had taught him to verify facts before reacting. After a long moment, he looked up. First, at his son, then at me. "These appear to be in order," he said, his voice revealing nothing of whatever emotion churned beneath. "James?" "This is absurd," James sputtered, color rising in his face. "I never signed any transfer of controlling interest. I would have remembered that. It was part of the trust restructuring after your uncle's death," I reminded him. "You were in Aspen with Heather from accounting, your previous executive assistant. You said you didn't have time to review the boring paperwork and told me to handle it." The memory of that phone call was etched into my mind. Standing in our home office, documents spread across the desk, listening to James's impatient voice echoing from the speakerphone, while snow-capped mountains reflected in his office windows. "Just tell me where to sign when I get back," he'd said dismissively. "I trust you, Beck." That had been his mistake. James looked to his father for support, but found none. Richard had warned him for years about his carelessness, his assumption that charm could substitute for diligence. Now that carelessness had cost him everything. "How long?" James asked, his voice suddenly hollow. "How long have you been planning this?" I considered the question, feeling a strange sort of calm settling over me. "I wasn't planning anything at first," I admitted. The paperwork was genuine, a legitimate restructuring that needed to happen for tax purposes. But when I realized what it could mean, what power it gave me, I trailed off, remembering the moment the attorney had explained the implications. Let's just say I kept it in my back pocket, for a rainy day. And what precipitated this deluge? Richard asked, his gaze sharp despite his measured tone. "The Cayman account was the final straw," I said quietly, watching James's face pale. "The one you used to purchase the condo in South Beach." I turned to Amber. "Congratulations on your new oceanfront property, by the way. Though I'm afraid the ownership might get rather complicated during the divorce proceedings." Amber's eyes widened as she turned to James. "You said that was a company investment property," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The ripple effect of my words moved through the room like a current. Eleanor pressed her lips together in a thin line, decades of suspicions finally confirmed. Richard removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. And James looked like a man watching his life's narrative rewritten before his eyes. "You had no right," he finally said, his voice barely controlled. "I had every right," I corrected him. "As your wife, as your partner. As the woman who helped build the modern version of Weston Financial while you were building your collection of mistresses." I stood up again, suddenly needing to move, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the scent of his cologne and her perfume. "The divorce papers include a generous settlement offer. You might want to review it before your access to the company accounts is terminated at midnight." I woke at 5:17 a.m. the morning after the anniversary dinner, my body still running on the precise schedule I'd maintained for 15 years as James Weston's wife. The bedroom of the Four Seasons suite felt cavernous around me, a deliberate choice, this neutral territory where James couldn't find me, where memories didn't lurk in every corner. My phone had 47 missed calls and 32 unread messages. I ignored them all, sliding out of bed and padding to the window. Boston's skyline was just beginning to emerge from darkness, pinpricks of light defining the architecture against the pre-dawn sky. Somewhere among those buildings stood the Weston Financial headquarters, its top-floor corner office mine now in more than just theory. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to process that this day, the first day of my new reality, had actually arrived. The suite's coffee maker produced a serviceable espresso. I carried it to the marble bathroom, sipping as I studied my reflection. I looked the same as yesterday, yet fundamentally altered, like a photograph with its colors subtly shifted. The woman who stared back had my features but seemed more substantial. Somehow, as if stepping into my power had given me physical weight in the world. My phone buzzed again on the counter, James, for the 12th time since midnight. I silenced it without reading the message. The Weston Financial Quarterly Review meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. James had asked me to attend these meetings for years, not to participate, just to serve as the perfect corporate wife, to pour coffee and make small talk with board members' spouses over lunch afterward. Today would be different. I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal Armani suit I'd purchased myself rather than one James had selected, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, comfortable Louboutin heels, armor for the battlefield. Ahead, the security guard at Weston Financial's lobby did a double take when I approached the executive elevator rather than the general bank. Mrs. Weston, he nodded respectfully, though confusion flickered across his face. The executive breakfast is already underway in the boardroom. Thank you, George, I replied, remembering his name as I always did with the staff James routinely ignored. That's where I'm headed. The elevator doors closed on his puzzled expression. As the car climbed 38 floors, I mentally rehearsed what would happen next. The boardroom would fall silent when I entered. James, if he'd managed to pull himself together after last night, would attempt to control the narrative. The board members, mostly James's golfing buddies and his father's contemporaries, would look to Richard for guidance. Richard, the wild card in all of this. Would he support his son out of family loyalty, or would the businessman in him recognize that James had become a liability? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the executive floor. Through the glass walls of the reception area, I could see across the open concept office to the boardroom beyond. 12 men in dark suits surrounding the massive mahogany table, with James at the head, gesticulating as he spoke. No mistress today, I noted with grim satisfaction. Lisa, the executive floor receptionist, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me. Mrs. Weston. We weren't expecting, the meeting has already. It's all right, Lisa, I assured her, continuing toward the boardroom without breaking stride. I'm running a few minutes late. I could see the exact moment James spotted me through the glass walls, his animated explanation faltering mid-sentence, his hand freezing in mid-air. The board members, noting his distraction, turned in unison to follow his gaze. 12 pairs of eyes tracked my approach. I pushed open the heavy glass door, the controlled climate of the boardroom washing over me, always kept slightly too cold. Another way James established dominance in meetings, ensuring he was the only one truly comfortable in his custom-tailored suits. Gentlemen, I greeted them, my voice steady. I apologize for interrupting. Please, continue. My designated chair, when I was occasionally permitted to attend these meetings, had always been against the wall, separate from the table. Today, I pulled out the empty chair directly opposite James and sat down. Rebecca, James managed, his voice carefully modulated for his audience. This is a closed board meeting. I'm aware, I replied, placing my portfolio on the table and opening it deliberately. As majority shareholder, I felt it was time I participated directly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the usual hum of the building's ventilation system seemed to pause. Charles Harrington, the oldest board member and James's godfather, cleared his throat. James, perhaps you should explain what's happening here. James's smile was strained, the vein at his temple visibly pulsing. A misunderstanding, Charles. Rebecca and I had a personal disagreement last night. She's understandably upset, but this is hardly the venue to address marital issues. This isn't about our marriage, I corrected calmly. Though the divorce papers have been filed. I retrieved copies of the shareholder documents from my portfolio and began passing them around the table. This is about the future of Weston Financial. As you can see from these documents, I've held controlling interest in the company for the past 3 years. The rustle of papers filled the silence as the board members reviewed the evidence before them. I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to calculation as the implications became clear. This is preposterous, James declared, though his voice lacked conviction. My attorney will contest these documents immediately. Your attorney drafted them, I pointed out. Martin was quite thorough in explaining their implications at the time. Not his fault you were too busy to listen. Richard Weston, seated 3 chairs down from his son, hadn't touched the documents. He didn't need to. He'd reviewed them thoroughly last night at La Maison. The documents are legitimate, he confirmed, each word measured. The question becomes what Rebecca intends to do with her controlling interest. All eyes returned to me. For 15 years, these men had seen me only as James's attractive, supportive wife. I'd poured their coffee, remembered their children's names, sent thoughtful gifts after surgeries or for retirements. I had been invisible, yet omnipresent, like the tasteful artwork on the boardroom walls. My intentions are simple, I stated, meeting each gaze directly. Weston Financial will continue its operations without interruption. Client accounts will remain secure. The only significant change, I paused, turning to James, will be in executive leadership. You're firing me, James said flatly. Not a question. Effective immediately, I confirmed. The severance package is generous. More than generous considering the financial irregularities my team has uncovered. I extracted another document from my portfolio. This is a complete audit of the Cayman account, James, the one you've been using to fund your extracurricular activities. The board members exchanged concerned glances. Financial impropriety was the one sin this group would never forgive. You had me investigated? James asked, incredulity breaking through his corporate mask. No, I corrected him. I investigated you myself. 5 months ago, when the jeweler called to verify the engraving on duplicate diamond bracelets charged to our joint account. I looked pointedly at the empty chair where Amber would have sat had she been invited. I've had access to all of our accounts for 15 years, James. Did you think I didn't know how to read financial statements? James's carefully constructed facade cracked further, revealing the panic beneath. He looked to his father for support, but Richard's expression remained impassive. There are certain appearances to maintain, Richard finally said, addressing the room rather than his son. The market responds poorly to instability, especially in financial institutions. Precisely why I've prepared a comprehensive transition plan, I replied, distributing another set of documents, including a press release announcing James's departure to pursue personal projects and my temporary assumption of CEO responsibilities, while the board conducts a formal executive search. Charles Harrington adjusted his reading glasses as he scanned the press release. This is remarkably thorough, Rebecca. The surprise in his voice would have been insulting if it wasn't so. Predictable. I've had 3 years to prepare, Charles, I reminded him gently. And 15 years observing how this company operates from the perfect vantage point, behind the coffee pot. We met at the Massachusetts General Hospital fundraising gala in 2008. I was 27, working in development, coordinating donor relations for the Cardiac Research Center. James was 32, already making waves in Boston's financial circles after returning from 5 years at Goldman Sachs to join his father's firm. I spotted him across the ballroom, his charisma palpable even from a distance. Confident stance, perfectly tailored tuxedo, and a surprisingly genuine laugh that stood out in a room of calculated social performances. That's James Weston, my colleague whispered. His family donated the pediatric wing. Old money, but he's the first in generations to actually work rather than just manage the family fortune. An hour later, he appeared beside me at the champagne fountain. You've been working the room like a maestro conducting an orchestra, he said, extending a flute. It's mesmerizing to watch. Mr. Weston, thank you for your family's support of the pediatric wing. James, please. His striking blue eyes held genuine appreciation. You're the one who wrote that extraordinary thank you letter detailing exactly how our donation was allocated. Most impressive. Donors should see tangible results of their generosity, I explained. Numbers on tax forms don't inspire continued giving. Stories of lives changed do. Precisely why I've been watching you. You're not just collecting checks, you're building relationships. His gaze was assessing but not objectifying. You have a remarkable talent for making people feel both special and accountable. That night, we talked for hours on the hospital's grand entrance steps. He described transforming his father's traditional firm into something more dynamic. I shared my passion for connecting resources to meaningful causes. We discovered shared interests and identical tastes that seemed to align perfectly. Our courtship was a whirlwind. James approached romance like business, with focus, determination, and thorough research. He remembered every preference I mentioned: ranunculus instead of roses, dark chocolate with sea salt, my dream of visiting the Galapagos. 3 months later, he chartered a yacht for a private tour of those very islands, watching giant tortoises. On shore, I caught him studying me instead of the landscape. I'm wondering how I got so lucky, he said, taking my hand. My father told me, in business and life, when you find an asset undervalued by the market, move decisively. The comparison to an undervalued asset seemed charming then, a financial man's unique expression of affection. Only years later, would I recognize it as the first red flag. 6 months into our relationship, James invited me to help with a crucial pitch to the state teachers' pension fund. I stayed up revamping his presentation, shifting from raw performance metrics to ethical investment approaches. When questions arose during the meeting, James directed them to me with complete confidence in my expertise. After securing the $1.22 billion account, he arrived at my apartment with champagne and a job offer. Join Weston Financial as Director of Client Relations. We'd be unstoppable together, Beck. Your emotional intelligence combined with my financial acumen could transform the firm. 3 months later, I had both his grandmother's engagement ring and a new nameplate reading Rebecca Weston, Director of Client Relations. The early years were remarkable. My approach to client communications retained investors through the 2008 crisis. James's strategies, tempered by my ethical considerations, delivered consistent returns despite market volatility. We were true partners, complementary skills creating something greater than either could achieve alone. You have remarkable instincts, he often said. It's like having insider information on human nature. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to change. Not in a dramatic shift, but a subtle repositioning, like a ship's course adjusting by 1 degree. The change came the night Richard Weston announced his intention to step back, positioning James to take over as CEO. Richard Weston's retirement celebration unfolded at the Boston Harbor Hotel, the city's financial elite gathering to honor the man who had guided Weston Financial through 4 decades of steady growth. From my table near the front, I watched, with pride as James delivered the keynote speech. My father taught me that financial management isn't just about numbers, he began confidently. It's about relationships, trust, and vision that extends beyond quarterly reports. As we enter our next chapter, he continued, we'll build on those principles while embracing new approaches. His gaze found mine. And I wouldn't be standing here without my partner in every sense. Rebecca, would you join me? Surprised, I moved to the podium as James wrapped an arm around my waist. Many of you know we secured the Teachers' Pension Fund 3 years ago. What you may not know is that Rebecca completely restructured our presentation the night before, transforming it from a standard pitch into a vision for ethical capitalism that won the account. She's been the secret weapon behind our 40% growth in institutional clients. The acknowledgement, public and unequivocal, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was the partnership I'd dreamed of, professional respect intertwined with personal devotion. That night marked the beginning of 3 extraordinary years. Under James's leadership as CEO, with me as his trusted advisor, Weston Financial flourished. We expanded from regional prominence to national recognition, opening offices in New York and Chicago. Our professional synergy amplified our personal connection. Weekends were spent sailing in Nantucket Sound, working in wordless coordination. Evenings found us hosting dinner parties for clients who became friends, drawn by our obvious delight in each other's company. "You two are disgustingly perfect," our friend Meredith declared after one gathering. "James still looks at you like you're the only person in the room." "We're partners," I replied simply. "In everything." This partnership extended to the core of the business. When James considered acquiring a sustainable investment firm, he brought the confidential prospectus home for my review. "I need your read on their client relationships," he said, spreading documents across our kitchen island. "Are they aligned with our approach?" I spent a day analyzing their communications and metrics, developing a transition strategy. When I presented my findings, James was impressed. "This is brilliant," he said. "The board will approve this acquisition, based on your plan alone." He reached for my hand. "You should be in the C-suite." The following month, I became Weston Financial's first chief client officer, with a corner office near James's, an expanded team, and a seat at the decision-making table. Our personal life thrived alongside professional success. We purchased a vacation property on Martha's Vineyard and established the Weston Foundation for Educational Opportunities, a cause I'd championed since my hospital days. At the 5-year mark of James's CEO tenure, we held a strategic planning retreat in the Berkshires. I presented comprehensive research on emerging client expectations, proposing a digital transformation strategy to address changing investor priorities. When I finished, board members exchanged approving nods. Richard gave me a subtle acknowledgement from across the table. "Remarkable insight," Walter Thorne, our oldest board member, commented. "Precisely the forward-thinking Weston needs." James moved to the front. "I think we all agree Rebecca's vision represents exactly the direction we need. I'd like to allocate resources immediately to implement these recommendations." That evening, we celebrated in our suite, champagne cooling beside a spread from the lodge's kitchen. James raised his glass. "To us, the perfect team." "To us," I echoed, believing our partnership was unshakable. I couldn't have known we stood at our relationship's zenith, that subtle shifts had already begun, like tectonic plates moving imperceptibly before an earthquake. 2 weeks after the retreat, James hired a new executive assistant. Heather Daniels, 29, held a Wellesley business degree and experience at competitor firms. She was strikingly attractive, with the polished appearance of someone who invested significantly. In personal presentation, "Heather, this is my wife Rebecca," James introduced us. "Chief Client Officer and the brains behind our client strategy." "Mrs. Weston," she acknowledged with perfect courtesy. "Your Berkshire presentation was apparently legendary. Mr. Weston has referenced it in 3 meetings already." At the time, I thought nothing of the interaction. In retrospect, it was the first small stone in what would become an avalanche. The changes were subtle at first, so incremental that I dismissed each as coincidence or overthinking. 6 weeks after Heather joined Weston Financial, I noticed the first shift in our routine. James and I had always shared morning coffee in his office, discussing the day ahead. 15 minutes of connection before work pulled us in different directions. One Tuesday, I arrived with our usual coffee cups to find his door closed, Heather stationed attentively at her desk outside. "Is he on a call?" I asked, balancing the mugs. "Mr. Weston has an early client breakfast," she informed me without looking up. "He left 20 minutes ago." "That's odd. It's not on our shared calendar." "Last-minute arrangement with the Donovan Group. Very confidential acquisition." He asked me not to add it to the system yet. I nodded, accepting the explanation while feeling a flicker of discomfort. James and I had always discussed potential acquisitions before he approached targets. The Donovan Group wasn't a name I recognized from our planning. That evening at home, I mentioned the meeting casually. How did it go with the Donovan Group? James looked up from his tablet with momentary confusion. Donovan Group? Your breakfast meeting this morning? Oh, right. He set down the tablet. Just preliminary discussions. Nothing concrete yet. He changed the subject immediately. The incident seemed minor, a scheduling oversight, a memory lapse, but it planted a seed of awareness. Over the next few months, I began noticing other small discrepancies. Client meetings missing from our shared calendar. Evening calls that required privacy. Weekend work emergencies that took him to the office for hours. Each had a reasonable explanation when examined individually. Collectively, they formed a pattern I wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. 4 months after Heather's arrival, I was scheduled to present our client retention strategy to a major institutional investor. I'd spent weeks preparing, analyzing their specific concerns, and developing tailored recommendations. James had reviewed my presentation the previous evening, offering valuable feedback. The morning of the presentation, I arrived early to find James and Heather already in the conference room, my slides displayed on the screen. Perfect timing, James said. Heather was just helping me make some final adjustments to the presentation. I set down my portfolio, a cold feeling settling in my stomach as I glanced at the screen. The slides had been completely reorganized, my carefully crafted narrative disrupted. I don't understand. We finalized this last night. I had some additional thoughts early this morning, James explained. Heather helped implement them. The changes streamlined things considerably. My detailed analysis had been reduced to bullet points, while the investment performance section, James's domain, was significantly expanded. You've removed my entire section on their ESG concerns, I pointed out. That was going to be our differentiator. It's still there, Heather interjected, clicking through slides. Just condensed. Mr. Weston thought performance metrics would be more compelling up front. The fact that she was explaining my husband's thinking to me felt surreal. More disturbing was James's silence, his tacit endorsement of this rearrangement without consultation. During the meeting, the potential client spent most of the Q&A asking detailed questions about the very ESG considerations that had been minimized. I reconstructed my analysis from memory, answering thoroughly. Afterward, the lead investor shook my hand warmly. Your understanding of our priorities is refreshing, Mrs. Weston. Most firms focus exclusively on returns without grasping the broader considerations our board has mandated. James maintained his professional smile until they left. See? No harm. Done. They loved it. They loved the parts I managed to include despite the changes, I corrected quietly. He laughed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. Always so serious. We're a team. The important thing is, we impress them. That night, I told myself I was imagining things, projecting insecurities onto innocent professional interactions. But the seed of doubt had been planted. 3 months. After the presentation incident, Weston Financial landed the institutional investor I'd pitched. Their decision letter specifically cited our comprehensive approach to ESG principles as the differentiating factor. James brought the news to my office personally, waving the letter triumphantly. We got them, he announced, dropping into a visitor chair. $50 million under management to start, with potential for their entire pension portfolio if we perform well for 2 quarters. That's wonderful, I replied, genuinely pleased despite my lingering resentment about the presentation struggle. When did they call? Email came through about an hour ago. He slid the printed message across my desk. Thomas Hamilton specifically mentioned your detailed responses about their labor concerns. Seems your personal touch made the difference. The acknowledgement felt good, validation that my approach had value beyond the softer metrics dismissal. I'm glad they appreciated the thoroughness. Their board has a strong union presence, so labor practices are naturally a priority. James nodded. You really do have remarkable instincts for these intangibles. We should celebrate tonight. Dinner at Sorolina? I'd love that, I said, reaching for my calendar. I can move my 7 o'clock call. Perfect. I'll have Heather make the reservation. I hesitated, then decided to broach the subject directly. Speaking of Heather, there's something I've been meaning to discuss. James raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral. Oh? I've noticed some irregularities in your schedule lately. Meetings that don't appear on our shared calendar. Evening calls that weren't mentioned beforehand. The Baldwin acquisition has required unusual discretion, he replied smoothly. We've been operating with a skeleton team to prevent leaks. I understand that, but I'm your wife, James, and Chief Client Officer. These changes affect my ability to coordinate our client strategy. He sighed, leaning forward. You're right. I should have kept you better informed. Things have been moving quickly, and Heather has been managing most of the scheduling. I'll speak with her about ensuring you're properly looped in. The redirection was subtle, shifting responsibility to his assistant rather than acknowledging his own role in the communication breakdown. I noted it, but pressed forward. It's not just about scheduling. It's about our partnership. We've always been transparent with each other about business decisions. Lately, it feels like that's changing. James's expression softened into the concerned, attentive look I knew so well. I've been preoccupied with the Baldwin deal, it's true, but nothing fundamental has changed, Beck. You're still my most trusted advisor. Am I? The question emerged, more vulnerable than I'd intended. Because the restructuring of my presentation without consultation didn't feel like you trusted my judgment. His brow furrowed. Are you still upset about that? It was a minor adjustment to improve flow, not a referendum on your expertise. It wasn't minor, James. It fundamentally altered my strategic approach, and you didn't even discuss it with me first. James leaned back, subtle defensiveness creeping into his posture. Heather is my executive assistant. Using her to execute tasks is literally her job description, not a commentary on our marriage. This isn't about her job description, I clarified. It's about the changing dynamic between us. We've always been partners in business and marriage. Equal voices, equal respect. Recently, it feels like my voice carries less weight. That's absurd, James dismissed with a flash of irritation. You're reading too much into routine decisions. The Hamilton win proves your input is still valued. They specifically cited your contribution. After I salvaged the presentation during Q&A, I reminded him, despite having my analysis minimized beforehand. He stood abruptly. This isn't productive, Rebecca. We landed a major client. We should be celebrating, not rehashing perceived slights. The deflection was so practiced, so smooth, that I almost let it pass. But something made me persist. I'm not talking about just one incident. I'm talking about a pattern that concerns me. Your unexplained absences, the closed-door meetings, I'm no longer included in, the decisions made without my input. James's expression blended patience with mild exasperation. You're imagining connections between unrelated necessities. Yes, certain aspects of the Baldwin acquisition require confidentiality. None of that reflects any change in how I value our partnership. I studied him, this man I'd loved and trusted for nearly 8 years, trying to reconcile his words with the subtle shifts I'd been experiencing. Was I overthinking routine business variations? Perhaps you're right, I conceded finally, though the disquiet remained. The Baldwin deal has everyone on edge. Let's reset over dinner. Relief washed over his features, replaced quickly by his characteristic charm. Absolutely. 8 o'clock at Sorolina, and we leave shop talk at the door, just husband and wife celebrating a win. After he left, I sat motionless, replaying the conversation. James had acknowledged nothing substantive, offered no meaningful adjustments, yet somehow I'd ended up questioning my own perceptions. His ability to reframe concerns as misunderstandings was masterful, a skill that served him well in negotiations but felt manipulative when directed at me. The Baldwin acquisition closed successfully 3 months after our confrontation. The deal nearly doubled our assets under management and established our Chicago presence. At the company-wide celebration in our Boston headquarters, James delivered a triumphant speech about strategic vision and calculated risk-taking. I stood in the crowd, watching my husband in his element, gesturing emphatically, drawing appreciative laughter with well-timed anecdotes about the negotiations. And none of this would have been possible, he concluded, without the extraordinary team effort from our senior leadership. He proceeded to acknowledge each executive by name: the CFO who structured the financing, legal counsel who navigated regulatory hurdles, even the marketing director who created the integration communications plan. My name was conspicuously absent, despite the client retention strategy I'd developed specifically for the transition. After the speech, I approached James near the stage. "Quite an achievement. Everyone seems thrilled." "As they should be," he replied, flush with success. "This positions us for national expansion ahead of schedule. The board is ecstatic. I noticed you didn't mention my retention strategy in your acknowledgments. The one that secured 98% of Baldwin's client base through the transition." James blinked, momentary confusion crossing his features before smoothing. "Did I miss that? Must have been an oversight in the excitement. You know how these speeches go, always someone left out." He squeezed my shoulder. "Everyone knows your contribution, Beck." The following week brought the first physical manifestation of my changing status. Returning from a client lunch, I found maintenance workers removing the nameplate from my office door. "Excuse me," I said, confused. "What's happening here?" The worker glanced up, clearly uncomfortable. "Just following orders, ma'am. We're relocating. Your office." "Relocating?" "I haven't been informed of any relocation." He shrugged apologetically. "All I know is we're supposed to move your things to 1714. Your new nameplate is already installed there." 1714 was on the 17th floor, 2 floors below the executive level where I'd been positioned since my promotion to Chief Client Officer. I immediately headed to James's office. "What's happening with my office?" I demanded as I entered. Finding him reviewing documents with our CFO, James looked up, momentarily startled. "Rebecca, we're in the middle of something here." "Apparently, so am I." "Why are maintenance workers removing my nameplate?" The CFO discreetly excused himself, closing the door behind him. "I was going to discuss this with you this evening," James said, his tone mildly reproachful. "The executive floor is being reconfigured to accommodate the Chicago leadership team. Your role involves the most direct client contact, so it makes sense to position you closer to the client relations team. The new space is actually larger, with a better view of the harbor. This is about optics, and you know it. Moving the only female executive, who happens to be your wife, off the leadership floor sends a clear message about hierarchy." He sighed, setting down his pen with deliberate calm. "This is a practical space allocation decision, not a referendum on your status. The Chicago executives need proximity to me for integration purposes." The explanation was so rational that arguing would make me appear emotional and resistant to organizational improvement. This was James's specialty, reframing fundamental changes as obvious operational necessities. By day's end, I was installed in my new office, a perfectly acceptable space with the promised harbor view, but unmistakably removed from the center of power. The physical distance created immediate practical challenges. I was no longer included in impromptu discussions among executives sharing the same floor. Information increasingly reached me through formal channels rather than organic conversation. Within a month, I noticed my name had been removed from the executive leadership page on the company website, replaced with a listing under Senior Management. Team. When I inquired, the marketing director explained that the site had been streamlined to feature C-suite executives only. My position title remained unchanged, but my practical authority was being systematically dismantled through individually defensible adjustments that collectively amounted to demotion. 6 months after the Baldwin acquisition, Richard Weston celebrated his 70th birthday with an intimate gathering at his Beacon Hill home. I arrived alone, James having texted that he would meet me there after wrapping up some details at the office. An excuse that no longer surprised me. Eleanor Weston greeted me in the foyer, immaculate in a navy St. John suit that perfectly complemented her silver hair. "Rebecca, darling, James isn't with you." "He's coming directly from the office," I explained, handing my wrap to the attendant. "You know how he is with work." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Indeed I do." Richard was exactly the same at that age. Always one more call to make, one more document to review. As we moved through the gathering, I noticed several wives of Richard's contemporaries watching our progress with subtle interest. These women had known Eleanor for decades, had witnessed her navigate her role as the spouse of a powerful financier, through evolution similar to what I was experiencing. The conversation among the guests covered the usual topics: market conditions, regulatory changes, mutual acquaintances' health challenges. I participated automatically, my social training carrying me through expected exchanges while my mind processed the undertones and patterns around me. "Rebecca, would you mind helping me in the kitchen for a moment?" Eleanor's request provided a welcome reprieve. I followed her through the dining room into the spacious kitchen, where catering staff were arranging elaborate hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. "Actually, I just wanted a moment of quiet," Eleanor confessed once we were alone. In the adjoining butler's pantry, she opened a cabinet, retrieving a crystal decanter of amber liquid. "Scotch? Richard's private reserve. I find one small glass makes these evenings more bearable." The unexpected glimpse of Eleanor's authentic self momentarily stunned me. "I'd love one, thank you." She poured 2 modest servings, handing me one before raising her glass in a silent toast. The scotch was exceptional, warming my throat with complex notes of peat and vanilla. 45 years, Eleanor said after a contemplative sip. "That's how long I've been orchestrating evenings like this, standing beside Richard at functions, remembering names of clients' grandchildren, and pretending to care about golf handicaps." I studied her over the rim of my glass, seeing beneath the flawless exterior to the shrewd intelligence that had always been there, though carefully subdued in public settings. "I've watched you these past months, Rebecca," she continued. "The changes in your role haven't gone unnoticed." The direct acknowledgement of what had been happening, from someone who understood the dynamics intimately, felt both validating and somehow ominous. "It's a natural evolution," I offered, echoing James's explanation. "The company is expanding. Roles are shifting." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "Is that what he tells you? That it's just organizational restructuring?" She set down her glass, her voice lowering despite our privacy. "Richard said the same things when I was gradually eased out of the company decisions I once helped make. Streamlining operations, he called it. You were involved in Weston's early days?" "I wrote the first business plan," she replied matter-of-factly. "Finance degree from Smith, class of 74, though you won't find that mentioned in any company history. Richard and I built the foundation together while living in that tiny apartment in Cambridge. I managed our first 3 client relationships, personally." I struggled to reconcile this revelation with the Eleanor I'd known for 8 years, the consummate hostess who discussed charity galas and interior decoration, never business strategy. "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Success happened. The more prominent the firm became, the more Richard believed it needed a traditional structure to reassure old money clients. Having his wife visibly involved seemed unprofessional. Her smile turned melancholic. So I gradually became the corporate wife instead of the business partner, planning dinners instead of investment strategies. And you accepted that? I adapted, she corrected. There were compensations, financial security, social status, the freedom to raise James with every advantage. She studied me thoughtfully. Different choices than you might make, perhaps, but they were choices made within the constraints of my generation. The pantry door opened before I could respond, revealing James in his perfectly tailored suit. "There you are," he said, eyes moving between his mother and me. "Dad said you might be in here. What are you two conspiring about?" "Just girl talk," Eleanor replied smoothly, her corporate wife persona slipping back into place so seamlessly I might have imagined our entire conversation. "I was sharing my secret weapon for handling Richard's business associates." James laughed, placing an arm around my waist possessively. "Don't give away all your secrets, Mom. I need Rebecca functional at our client events." The casual objectification, rendering me a functional accessory rather than a partner, struck me with new significance given Eleanor's revelations. I felt Eleanor watching me, gauging my reaction, perhaps seeing her younger self in my carefully maintained smile. As James guided me back to the party, Eleanor's parting words echoed in my mind. "History is written by those who control the narrative, Rebecca. Remember that." 1 year after the Baldwin acquisition, I sat in a quarterly leadership meeting watching my professional erasure reach its completion. The conference room buzzed with executives preparing departmental presentations while James reviewed the agenda on screen. "We'll start with Marcus on Q3 financials, then Kate on marketing initiatives, followed by Thomas with the Chicago integration update. After lunch, client analytics and next quarter's projections." I scanned the agenda, then checked my copy again. My name was conspicuously absent, despite the client retention report I'd prepared and submitted as requested. When the presentations began, I maintained professional composure, taking notes and asking relevant questions. As the morning session ended, I approached James at the front of the room. "I noticed my client retention presentation isn't on the agenda," I said quietly. "Was there a reason it was removed?" James glanced up from his tablet, mildly surprised. "Oh, we integrated your data into Thomas's Chicago report. Seemed more efficient than having separate presentations covering overlapping territory. I wasn't informed of that decision, and my report covers our entire client base, not just Chicago. It was a last-minute adjustment to tighten the schedule," he explained, gathering his papers. "The key metrics are still being presented. That's what matters, right?" Before I could respond, Thomas Mitchell, the newly appointed Chicago Regional Director, approached. "James, do you have a moment to discuss the Peterson account before we reconvene? They're pushing for additional fee concessions." "Of course," James replied, immediately shifting his attention. "Rebecca, would you mind grabbing those market projection printouts from my office? Heather can help you locate them." With that dismissal, he and Thomas moved away, already deep in conversation about a client I had personally brought to the firm 3 years earlier. I stood momentarily frozen, processing what had just happened. I had been reduced to an errand runner, sent to grab printouts like an intern while substantive client discussions happened without me. When the meeting reconvened, I watched Thomas present his Chicago integration report. Embedded within it was a single slide summarizing client retention metrics, my comprehensive analysis reduced to 3 bullet points, and a simplified graph that obscured the sophisticated retention strategies I'd implemented. "As you can see," Thomas explained, "retention has remained strong through the integration, with only minimal attrition in the smaller account segments. No mention of my personalized outreach program, the relationship managers I'd carefully paired with high-value clients, or the custom communication strategy that had preserved 98% of assets during the transition." My work had been not just minimized, but anonymized, absorbed into corporate results with no attribution. After the meeting, Diane Patterson from Human Resources entered my office with a manila folder and an expression that immediately put me on alert. "Rebecca, do you have a moment? As you know, we're implementing the new organizational structure following the Baldwin integration. The executive committee has approved several changes to streamline operations." She opened the folder to reveal an organizational chart. "Your role as Chief Client Officer is being reconfigured. Given the regional directors in Chicago and Boston, we're shifting to a decentralized client management approach." "This eliminates my position entirely," I noted, studying the chart. "Not eliminated, evolved. We're creating a new role, Senior Advisor for Client Strategy. That would leverage your expertise in an advisory capacity. Without direct reports, without budget authority, without a seat on the executive committee." I looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "A consultative position rather than a leadership role." "The compensation package remains the same," she assured, quickly. That evening, I dressed carefully for dinner with James at Sorolina, the restaurant where we'd celebrated the Hamilton acquisition, when I was last publicly credited with securing a major client. As I fastened my grandmother's pearls, I considered Diane's presentation of my new advisory role, the corporate equivalent of being put out to pasture while maintaining the appearance of value. The same pattern Eleanor had described from her own experience decades earlier, now repeating with striking precision. My 15th wedding anniversary fell on a Thursday, precisely 3 weeks after the restructuring conversation at Sorolina. In the intervening time, I had outwardly accepted the transition to my new advisory role with the professional grace expected of a corporate wife, while privately executing a carefully considered plan. James had suggested we postpone our anniversary celebration until the weekend, citing an important client dinner he couldn't reschedule. "The Andersons are only in town Thursday night," he'd explained, his tone genuinely apologetic. 15. Years deserves a proper celebration without time constraints. Let's do something special on Saturday instead. I'd agreed readily, having anticipated this exact scenario. James's prioritization of client entertainment over our anniversary merely provided additional confirmation of what I already knew. What James didn't know was that I had planned my own commemoration of our 15 years together. I'd reserved the private dining room at La Maison, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, and the venue of James's extravagant proposal a lifetime ago. I'd invited 40 guests, family, close friends, board members, and key clients with whom we'd developed personal relationships over the years. The invitations, elegant letterpress cards with hand-calligraphed addresses, had specified a celebration of partnership, rather than explicitly mentioning our anniversary, allowing me the flexibility I needed for what would follow. On Wednesday afternoon, I received a text from James that made my breath catch despite my mental preparation. "Running late tonight. Dinner with Anderson clients extending to drinks. Don't wait up." The familiar excuse might have once prompted concerned inquiries or thinly veiled disappointment. Instead, I replied with simple acknowledgement. "Understood. Good luck with the Andersons." That evening, I called Amber's direct line at the office, knowing James would be unreachable during his client dinner. "Mr. Weston's office," she answered crisply. "Amber, it's Rebecca Weston. I need to confirm James's attendance at tomorrow's event. He mentioned the Anderson dinner might run late." The momentary silence on the line was telling. "The Anderson dinner?" she finally repeated, confusion evident in her tone. "I don't have that on his schedule for tomorrow." "Tonight," I corrected her. "The dinner is tonight. I'm asking about tomorrow's event at La Maison." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Weston doesn't have any client engagements on his calendar for this evening, Mrs. Weston, and I don't see anything scheduled at La Maison tomorrow." "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. That's strange. Perhaps he made the arrangements personally. Thank you, Amber. I ended the call, adding this final piece to the pattern I'd been documenting for months. The lies had become so routine that James no longer bothered coordinating his cover stories with his assistant. Curious about exactly where my husband was spending our anniversary eve, I opened the tracking app we'd installed years ago to locate each other's phones in emergencies. The blue dot indicating James's location pulsed steadily at an address in the Seaport District. The Liberty, a boutique hotel known for its harbor views and discretion. The confirmation should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if the final puzzle piece had clicked into place, revealing the complete picture I'd been assembling for months. The double betrayal, professional and personal, was now irrefutable. I closed the app and returned to my preparations for the following evening. The anniversary dress I'd purchased, an elegant ivory sheath with subtle gold threading, hung ready in the closet. The carefully selected wine had been delivered to La Maison that morning. The custom menu had been finalized, featuring dishes from significant moments in our relationship. Every detail had been arranged with the same meticulous attention I'd once dedicated to building Weston Financial's client relationships. But this event would serve a very different purpose than celebration. As I reviewed my notes one final time, I felt no anger, no devastation, only the calm determination that comes with absolute certainty. Tomorrow would mark not just 15 years of marriage, but the end of a chapter that had extended 3 generations into the past. The breaking point, when reached, brings not chaos, but clarity. And I had never seen my path forward more clearly than I did on the eve of my 15th wedding anniversary, alone in the home I shared with a husband who was currently with another woman at a hotel overlooking Boston Harbor. James returned home. At 6:42 a.m. on our anniversary, his attempt at stealth undermined by the security system that chimed softly when the front door opened. I was already awake, seated at the kitchen island with coffee and my laptop, reviewing final details for the evening ahead. "Early start?" he asked, feigning casualness as he set down his briefcase. His suit was impeccably pressed. Not the same one he'd worn when leaving yesterday, I noticed. "Anniversary preparations," I replied truthfully, confirming some details for Saturday. He nodded, pouring himself coffee. The Anderson meeting ran incredibly late. Ended up just staying at the office to review their portfolio concerns. The lie came easily, practiced. "Sorry I didn't make it home." "These things happen," I said, closing my laptop. "How are the Andersons? Still concerned about the tech sector exposure?" "Exactly that," he confirmed, seemingly relieved by my understanding. "Martin's worried about the regulatory headwinds affecting their long positions." I nodded, allowing the fabrication to stand. "I'm heading to the office soon. Early client call. I'll shower and join you there," he said, dropping a perfunctory kiss on my head as he passed. "Happy anniversary, by the way." He hesitated, then added, "Saturday. Will be special, I promise." After he disappeared upstairs, I opened my laptop again, accessing the document I'd been reviewing before his arrival. Not Saturday plans, but the complete financial analysis I'd compiled over the past 3 months. While James had been systematically dismantling my professional position, I had been conducting a thorough investigation of Weston Financial's operations, with particular focus on executive expenses, compensation structures, and account management practices. My position, though diminished, still provided access to systems and data that painted a comprehensive picture of the company's financial operations. What I discovered had transformed my personal disappointment into something far more serious. The Chicago expansion that had served as pretext for my marginalization showed troubling irregularities. A holding company called Lakefront Partners had been established to manage certain specialized client relationships transferred from Boston. The documentation was meticulous on the surface, with proper authorizations and signatures, including my own on several transfer documents, except I had never signed those documents. My digital signature had been applied to client transfers, compensation agreements, and organizational changes I'd never approved. The forgeries were sophisticated but unmistakable. The metadata showed they'd been executed while I was demonstrably elsewhere, in some cases while I was traveling internationally. More concerning were the financial flows. Certain high-value client accounts transferred to Chicago showed management fee structures that differed from our standard agreements. The differential, typically half a percentage point on substantial portfolios, was being directed not to Weston Financial's general revenue, but to a separate entity called Westview Consulting. Westview's ownership structure was carefully obscured through layers of LLCs, but my methodical tracing had revealed what James never expected anyone to discover. The ultimate beneficial owner was James himself, with minority interests held by Thomas Mitchell and, surprisingly, Heather. My husband had established a shadow company that was skimming revenue from transferred client accounts that had been moved from my oversight as part of the organizational restructuring. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Clients still received the expected returns and standard reporting. The diverted fees were small enough to avoid scrutiny in individual cases, but collectively amounted to millions annually across the transferred portfolio. Beyond the financial diversion, I discovered communications between James and Thomas discussing the next phase, plans to establish a completely separate investment firm that would eventually target Weston's most valuable clients for direct transfer. Their timeline indicated a launch within 6 months, after certain non-compete provisions in Thomas's contract expired. The evidence was irrefutable, documented in emails, financial transfers, and legal filings I had systematically collected and verified through independent sources. James wasn't just diminishing my role. He was systematically preparing to appropriate the most valuable parts of the company his father had built and that we had expanded together. The personal betrayal to could perhaps have rationalized as the predictable behavior of a man following his father's example. But this corporate theft, executed through forged documents and hidden entities, transcended marital disappointment. It was fraud, plain and simple, with my name falsely attached to authorizing documents. As I heard the shower running upstairs, I closed the laptop containing evidence that would shatter not just my marriage but potentially the company itself. For 15 years, I had been James's partner, then his accessory, and now, unwittingly, his apparent accomplice in financial impropriety. The anniversary celebration I had planned for that evening had just acquired an additional layer of significance. What had begun as a response to personal betrayal would now address a much larger breach of trust, one with potential legal implications that extended far beyond our marriage. I gathered my things, leaving before James finished his shower. The day ahead required final preparations, not just for the evening's revelation, but for the substantial aftermath that would follow. In the 3 months since the restructuring announcement, I had quietly constructed a comprehensive defense against my own erasure. While outwardly accepting my diminished role with appropriate corporate grace, I had been methodically preparing for a moment I increasingly saw as inevitable. My first step had been consulting Sarah Klein, a Harvard law classmate who had become one of Boston's premier attorneys specializing in corporate governance and shareholder disputes. Our initial meeting took place not in her downtown office, but in a private room at the Boston Public Library, neutral territory where we wouldn't attract attention from anyone in our overlapping professional circles. This goes beyond typical executive infighting, Sarah had observed after reviewing the preliminary evidence I'd gathered. The forged authorizations alone constitute serious misconduct. The diversion of client fees through Westview elevates this to potential fraud. What are my options? I'd asked, my notepad ready, approaching my marital dissolution with the same analytical thoroughness I'd once applied to client retention strategies. Sarah had outlined several potential approaches, from quietly negotiating a separation agreement to direct confrontation with legal consequences. The complicating factor is your dual role, wife and executive. Any action we take will have implications for both your personal and professional standing. I'm less concerned with appearances than with justice, I told her. I want a resolution that correctly allocates responsibility. That initial consultation had evolved into a carefully structured strategy, executed through sequenced steps over the subsequent weeks. Sarah had connected me with a forensic accountant who verified my findings about the fee diversions and created an independent record of the financial evidence. A digital security specialist had documented the forged electronic signatures, establishing timestamps that proved I couldn't have executed the authorizations. Most significantly, 3 weeks prior to my anniversary, I had met with Richard Weston at his Beacon Hill home while James was in Chicago. The decision to involve my father-in-law had not been made lightly, but the scope of James's actions went beyond our marriage to threaten the company Richard had spent his life building. I'd arrived with a comprehensive dossier, organized with the precision that had once made me an effective executive. Richard had listened silently as I presented the evidence, his expression revealing nothing until I reached the documentation of Westview Consulting and the planned separate firm. "He's not just pushing you aside," Richard had said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. "He's preparing to dismantle what 3 generations have built." "I believe that's the case," I'd confirmed, watching the information settle into his consciousness. Richard had removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What do you intend to do with this information, Rebecca?" "That depends. Partly on you," I'd replied honestly. "My primary concern is correcting the record regarding my alleged authorizations of these transfers. I won't have my name attached to misconduct I didn't approve." What had followed was a 3-hour conversation about governance, legacy, and appropriate consequences. Richard, despite his personal distress, had demonstrated the strategic thinking that built Weston Financial. "The board must be informed," he'd concluded finally. "But the manner of disclosure will determine whether the company survives this intact." Together, we had developed a plan that would address the breaches while minimizing damage to the firm's reputation and client relationships. Richard had provided one crucial piece of information I hadn't previously known. The shareholder agreement James had inherited contained specific provisions regarding executive misconduct, provisions that could be activated under precisely these circumstances. My father included these clauses after a competitor was destroyed by a rogue executive, Richard had explained. They're designed to protect the company by quickly isolating misconduct before it infects the entire organization. In parallel with these corporate preparations, I had been quietly securing my personal position. I'd transferred my personal assets to accounts James couldn't access. I'd consulted a separate attorney regarding divorce proceedings, which had been filed that morning, timed precisely to be processed before the evening's revelation. I'd leased a pied-à-terre in Back Bay, furnished it minimally, and arranged for the essentials I would need in the immediate aftermath. My most treasured possessions, family photographs, my grandmother's jewelry, irreplaceable mementos, had been gradually relocated to this sanctuary over the preceding weeks. The anniversary celebration at La Maison would serve as both ending and beginning, the public revelation of facts already documented and verified through proper channels. The guests had been selected with strategic purpose, board members who would need to act on the information, friends who would provide emotional support, and clients whose relationships I had personally cultivated and whose interests had been compromised by James's actions. As I finalized preparations that morning of our anniversary, I felt a surreal calm. The path ahead was uncertain, but the alternative, continuing as the diminished wife while my husband systematically appropriated the company we'd built together, was unthinkable. By noon, everything was in place. The final pieces had been arranged with the same attention to detail that had once made me an effective partner to James. The only remaining task was to dress for the occasion in the ivory anniversary dress that now symbolized not celebration, but liberation. The afternoon of our anniversary, I sequestered myself in my back bay pied-à-terre, methodically reviewing each element of the evening ahead. The temporary apartment, minimalist but elegant, had become my strategic headquarters, free from the surveillance of shared domestic spaces where James might notice unusual activity. Sarah Klein arrived at precisely 3 p.m., carrying a sleek, leather portfolio containing the final versions of documents we had carefully crafted over weeks of preparation. "The divorce filing has been processed," she confirmed, setting the portfolio on the glass dining table that had become my command center. "Judge Harriman signed the temporary orders this morning. Your financial accounts are legally protected." I nodded, relieved that this critical foundation was securely in place. "And the board materials?" "Collated and ready," Sarah replied, opening the portfolio to reveal precisely organized sections, each tab corresponding to a different aspect of James's misconduct. The summary memo provides the overview, followed by documented evidence of the unauthorized transfers, forged authorizations, and the Westview diversion scheme. The final section outlines the planned competitive entity and identifies which clients were targeted for eventual transfer. I reviewed the materials with the thoroughness that had once made me an effective executive, noting the careful redaction of certain details to protect client privacy while maintaining the integrity of the evidence. "Richard has the identical set," Sarah continued, referencing the copies delivered to my father-in-law that morning. "He's prepared to invoke the governance provisions immediately following your disclosure." The governance provisions, buried in Weston Financial's founding, documents and rarely referenced, established emergency protocols for addressing executive misconduct. They authorized the immediate suspension of any officer engaged in activities contrary to the company's interests, pending full board investigation. "The timing is critical," I noted, reviewing our sequence once more. "The announcement needs to happen before James has any opportunity to begin damage control." Sarah nodded, her expression reflecting the gravity of what we were undertaking. "Once you make the public disclosure, the legal machinery activates automatically. The temporary restraining order prevents him from accessing company systems or contacting clients until the investigation is complete." We had choreographed the sequence with precision: my public disclosure at the anniversary gathering, Richard's immediate invocation of the Governance Provisions Board member Charles Harrington's motion to implement the emergency protocol's IT securities, simultaneous revocation of James's system access, the legal team's notification to regulatory authorities regarding the client fund irregularities. Each step had been designed to contain the situation while protecting the company, its clients, and its reputation. The potential for James to cause additional damage would be neutralized within minutes of my revelation. "The executive committee members attending tonight have been briefed?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Richard handled it personally this morning," Sarah confirmed. "They've reviewed the evidence and understand their responsibilities in the protocol. The votes are secured." My phone chimed with a text from James. "Running late at the office. Where are you? Thought we'd go home together to change for dinner." I showed Sarah the message with a raised eyebrow. The practiced lie now seemed almost quaint compared to the magnitude of his actual deceptions. "Perfect timing," Sarah observed. "He has no idea what's coming." "No," I agreed, composing a response that would maintain the illusion for a few more hours. "Already out running errands. See you at La Maison, 7 p.m. Don't be late." As Sarah gathered her materials to leave, she paused at the door. "Rebecca, once this is set in motion, there's no turning back. The professional and personal consequences will be significant. Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to proceed?" I considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Was public disclosure at our anniversary celebration the appropriate forum for addressing James's misconduct? Would a private confrontation be more dignified? Had I explored every alternative to this orchestrated revelation? "I've had months to consider alternatives," I replied finally. James hasn't just betrayed me personally, he's compromised the company we built together and potentially harmed clients who trusted us. The public nature of his misconduct requires an equally transparent correction. Sarah nodded, satisfied with my resolution. Then I'll see you at La Maison. Richard will arrive early to ensure everything is in place. After her departure, I turned to the final preparations for the evening. The ivory dress, purchased weeks ago for what I had then believed would be a genuine celebration, hung ready. My grandmother's pearls, removed from our home safe during one of James's Chicago trips, waited on the dresser. I opened my laptop one last time, reviewing the presentation I had prepared for the evening. Not the sentimental photo montage typical of anniversary celebrations, but a precise documentation of the journey that had led to this moment of reckoning. The timeline traced our relationship from equal partners to my systematic marginalization, juxtaposed against evidence of the parallel financial scheme James had constructed. Each slide had been meticulously designed to present facts rather than accusations, allowing the documented evidence to speak for itself. As I closed the laptop, I felt neither vindictive pleasure nor anxious dread, only the calm certainty that comes from thoroughly considered action. What would unfold that evening was not revenge but restoration, the necessary rebalancing after years of mounting imbalance. By 5:30 p.m., I was dressed and ready, the ivory dress complemented by my grandmother's pearls and a composure built on absolute preparedness. In my clutch were the essentials for the evening: room key, phone, and a small USB drive containing backup copies of all evidence, should any technical issues arise with the presentation system. The car service arrived precisely on schedule. As we pulled away from the building, I watched the city transition from the familiar neighborhoods of my married life to the uncertain terrain of what would come after. The journey to La Maison would take approximately 20 minutes, the final countdown to a confrontation 15 years in the making. La Maison's private dining room glowed with soft amber light, orchid centerpieces gracing each table. White blooms James had once told me reminded him of my elegant strength. Crystal glasses caught and fractured the light, creating miniature constellations across damask tablecloths. Everything was perfect, exactly as I had specified. Richard arrived, first as planned, accompanied by Eleanor. The significance of their early appearance wasn't lost on me. This would be the first time in decades that Richard had attended an event without Eleanor managing the social preliminaries. "Rebecca," he greeted me, his expression somber beneath the social veneer. "Everything is prepared. The board members understand their roles." Eleanor took my hands in hers, her usually perfect composure showing subtle signs of strain. "Whatever happens tonight," she said quietly, "remember you're not just doing this for yourself." Guests arrived in a steady stream after that. Board members with their spouses, close friends, key clients who had become part of our social circle. Each greeted me with the warm congratulations appropriate for an anniversary celebration, unaware of the evening's true purpose. Sarah arrived with her husband, giving me a nearly imperceptible nod of confirmation. The legal team was in position, ready to implement the necessary protocols the moment disclosure occurred. At 7:05 p.m., with James still absent, I instructed the staff to begin serving champagne. The carefully selected vintage, a 2008 Dom Perignon from the year we met, circulated on silver trays as guests mingled, conversation flowing with the practiced ease of Boston's social elite. At 7:12 p.m., my phone vibrated with a text from James. "Running late. Start without me. There in 20. I showed the message to Richard, who nodded grimly. "Heather?" he asked, intuiting the likely cause of delay. "Probably," I replied. "It hardly matters now." At 7:30 p.m., with glasses filled and all guests present except the husband being celebrated, I moved to the small podium I had arranged at the front of the room. The murmur of conversation gradually quieted as attention turned to me. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. As you know, we've gathered to commemorate 15 years of partnership between James and myself. Supportive smiles greeted this opening, though I noted concern in some eyes regarding James's continued absence. Partnership has been the foundation of our relationship from the beginning, I continued. When we met at that hospital fundraiser 15 years ago, we recognized in each other complementary strengths. James's financial acumen paired with my relationship skills created something greater than either of us could achieve alone. I gestured to the screen behind me, which displayed a photograph from the early days of Weston Financial's expansion. James and I standing together at the opening of our New York office, equal partners in achievement. That equality of contribution defined both our marriage and our professional collaboration for many years. It was the source of Weston Financial's remarkable growth and the foundation of our personal happiness. The room remained attentive, still, unaware of the shift about to occur. I advanced to the next slide, a timeline showing the gradual erosion of my position within the company. 3 years ago, that partnership began to change. My role was systematically diminished through a series of organizational adjustments, each individually defensible, collectively amounting to erasure. Confused murmurs rippled through the gathering. Eleanor caught my eye from her seat beside Richard, giving me a slight nod of encouragement. I initially attributed these changes to evolving business needs, I explained, advancing through slides that documented my professional marginalization, until I discovered they were part of a larger pattern. The next slide displayed financial records, the evidence of unauthorized transfers and fee diversions through Westview Consulting. The murmurs intensified as the implications became clear to those with financial backgrounds. While systematically reducing my authority within Weston Financial, James was simultaneously establishing a separate entity to divert client funds and eventually compete directly with the firm his father built, and we expanded together. The room fell completely silent, all pretense of celebration abandoned as the gravity of my disclosure registered. Board members exchanged alarmed glances. Charles Harrington studied the financial documentation with narrowed eyes, his extensive banking experience immediately recognizing the impropriety displayed. Most disturbing, I continued, advancing to the final sequence of evidence, was the discovery that my digital signature had been applied to authorizations I never approved, making me an unwitting accomplice to actions I had no knowledge of. Richard rose at this point, moving to stand beside me at the podium. As founder and chairman emeritus of Weston Financial, he stated, his authoritative voice commanding immediate attention, I have verified the evidence Rebecca has presented. The board has been briefed and is prepared to implement the governance protocols established for precisely such situations. Charles Harrington stood next, his position as lead independent director giving his words particular weight. The emergency provisions have been activated. James Weston is suspended from all operational authority pending full investigation. The double doors at the back of the room swung open at that precise moment, revealing James with a young blonde woman at his side. Not his executive assistant Heather, as I had expected, but Amber Phillips, the 27-year-old who had replaced Heather 6 months earlier. Both froze in the doorway, confronted by the unexpected tableau of solemn faces and damning evidence displayed on the screen. "What is this?" James demanded, quickly registering that this was not the intimate anniversary dinner he had expected. To Rebecca, my rock, my inspiration, 15 wonderful years. I echoed his earlier toast from our rehearsal dinner, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. At least, that's what I imagined you might say tonight, had you remembered. Our anniversary was more than a dinner to postpone for client meetings. James advanced into the room, leaving Amber uncertainly at the threshold. "Rebecca, whatever you think you're doing—" "I'm not doing anything, James," I interrupted, echoing his dismissive phrasing from countless past conversations. I'm simply presenting documented facts to interested parties. His eyes darted from the screen to the assembled guests, quickly assessing the situation with the strategic acumen that had made him an effective CEO. This is a private matter that should be discussed without an audience, he attempted, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure everyone would understand if we postponed this celebration. The celebration has been postponed, I confirmed. This is now an emergency board meeting, triggered by evidence of financial misconduct, requiring immediate intervention. I gestured to Charles Harrington. The vote has already been taken. Your access to company systems has been suspended. James's expression hardened as he finally comprehended the true nature of the gathering. You've arranged quite a spectacle, he said, voice tight with controlled fury. Turning a marital disagreement into a corporate coup. Very dramatic, Rebecca. Not a coup, Richard corrected, his disappointment in his son evident despite his composed exterior. A necessary intervention to protect the company from further harm. The evidence is irrefutable, James. James turned to his father. Genuine. Shock breaking through his practiced confidence. You're part of this? I became involved when Rebecca showed me proof that you were not only pushing her out of the company we built together, but actively diverting client funds and planning to establish a competing firm, Richard replied steadily. This goes far. Beyond marital discord, son. James's gaze returned to me, reassessing with new understanding. So this is your revenge for what? Feeling underappreciated? Corporate restructuring you didn't agree with? This is accountability for forgery, financial impropriety, and breach of fiduciary duty, I corrected him. The divorce papers were filed. This morning, James, they're entirely separate from these corporate governance issues. The color drained from James's face as the full implications registered. Divorce papers? He repeated, his carefully constructed facade cracking visibly. Filed this morning? Quite efficient, actually, I replied, my composure a stark contrast to his growing agitation. Judge Harriman was particularly interested in the financial documentation, apparently diverting company assets while systematically excluding your wife from business operations creates a compelling case for financial misconduct in a marriage. Amber remained frozen in the doorway, her expression cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and dawning horror as she pieced together the situation she had unwittingly entered. Several guests glanced in her direction, recognition flickering. As they placed her within the company hierarchy, James straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain control of the situation. This is a gross mischaracterization of standard business restructuring, he asserted, addressing the room rather than me. Corporate governance evolves with company growth. Rebecca's role changed as our needs shifted. Any suggestion of impropriety is a dramatic overreaction. The forged signatures on transfer authorizations would disagree, Charles Harrington interjected, dryly. As would the undisclosed fee structure benefiting Westview Consulting. James's head snapped toward the board director, genuine alarm replacing his practiced confidence. How did you? I provided complete documentation to the board, I explained, including evidence that my digital signature was applied to documents while I was demonstrably elsewhere. The metadata is quite clear. A technical glitch, James attempted. Our systems have had authentication issues on 17 separate occasions, Richard interrupted, his tone reflecting disappointment rather than anger. Across multiple document types, always authorizing transfers you specifically benefited from? The controlled murmurs around the room had ceased entirely. The gathered witnesses, board members, executives, friends, family, watched in stunned silence as the carefully constructed image of James Weston, financial wunderkind and devoted husband, disintegrated before them. James's gaze darted around the room, seeking allies and finding none. His father stood firmly beside me. Charles Harrington and the other board members watched with the detached assessment of individuals calculating corporate risk. Even Amber had begun edging away from him, her association with this implosion clearly not what she had envisioned for the evening. In that moment of isolation, something shifted in James's expression, calculation replacing shock as he assessed his remaining options. Fine, he conceded, straightening his tie in a gesture I recognized as his preparation for negotiation. There have been some irregularities in documentation, administrative oversights in a complex integration, but transforming that into a public spectacle is unnecessarily destructive to the company. We should address this privately, as a family. That opportunity existed months ago, I replied evenly. When I first noticed the systematic erasure of my role, you chose dismissal instead of dialogue. Continued that choice through forgery, financial diversion, and personal betrayal. Tonight isn't about negotiation, James. It's about consequences. Eleanor Weston rose from her seat, moving to stand beside her husband and me. 3 generations of Weston leadership united against James's misconduct. Some patterns, she said quietly, her gaze meeting mine with understanding, require decisive interruption. James's focus narrowed on me, his expression hardening with the realization that his usual tactics would not prevail. You've orchestrated quite a performance, he acknowledged, anger bleeding through his controlled tone. But you're forgetting one crucial detail. The controlling interest in Weston Financial remains with me, regardless of these allegations. The board serves at my discretion. That's not precisely accurate, Richard corrected, nodding to Sarah, who produced a document from her portfolio and handed it to Charles Harrington. The shareholder agreement includes specific provisions regarding executive misconduct, Charles explained, scanning the document. Section 23, paragraph 4 states that upon documented evidence of fiduciary breach by the controlling shareholder, temporary control transfers to the founding partner or their designated successor pending full investigation. That's ridiculous, James snapped. That clause is meant for external threats, not internal disagreements. It's meant precisely for this situation, Richard countered. My father included it after watching a competitor destroyed by an executive who placed personal gain above company welfare. Charles continued reading. In cases where the founding partner is no longer active in management, control defaults to their board-approved designee. He looked up, meeting my eyes across the room. Richard designated Rebecca as his successor 3 weeks ago, with unanimous board approval. The absolute stillness that followed this revelation was broken only by the soft sound of James's sharp intake of breath. In that suspended moment, understanding dawned across his features, not just that he had lost control of the narrative, but that he had fundamentally misunderstood the narrative itself. What he had dismissed as a wife's emotional reaction to feeling sidelined was in fact a meticulously planned corporate response to documented misconduct. You can't be serious, he finally managed, looking from his father to Charles to me. Temporary. Control to Rebecca? She's not even what, James? I interrupted, my voice steady. Not even qualified? Not even essential to the company's success? Not even aware of your systematic betrayal of everything we built together? I stepped away from the podium, moving to the center of the room where everyone could witness what followed. 15 years of partnership, 8 years of marriage, 3 years of gradual erasure, all culminating in this moment of perfect clarity. To answer the question in your eyes, I said, addressing not just James but everyone present. Effective immediately, I am the acting CEO of Weston Financial Group. The divorce was finalized this morning through an expedited proceeding based on documented financial misconduct. And yes, I allowed myself the smallest smile of satisfaction. I kept the house, the company, and your reserved parking space. 6 months after the anniversary revelation, I stood at the window of the CEO's office, my office, watching Boston's financial district transition from day to evening. The same harbor view James had once claimed as the natural domain of the company's leader now framed my daily decisions. Though I'd redesigned the space to reflect my own leadership philosophy, rather than preserving his. The aftermath of that night had unfolded with the precision of a well-executed business strategy. James had been escorted from La Maison by security, his access to all company systems already revoked. The regulatory investigations had commenced immediately, focusing on the diverted client fees and forged authorizations rather than our personal relationship. The press had inevitably caught wind of the situation. Boston's financial community was too interconnected for complete discretion, but Richard's respected position and our transparent approach to the misconduct had contained the damage. Weston Financial Address's leadership irregularities made for less sensational headlines than CEO's wife orchestrates boardroom coup on anniversary night. Most clients had remained with the firm after receiving my personal explanation and assurance that their investments had been protected. The Chicago office continued operations under new leadership, with Thomas Mitchell notably absent. His role in the Westview scheme had resulted in his immediate termination and subsequent industry sanctions. The board had conducted its formal investigation, voting unanimously to make my temporary leadership permanent after reviewing the evidence and my handling of the transition. Charles Harrington had been particularly supportive, noting that the skills I'd demonstrated in managing both the discovery and its aftermath confirmed I had been the right choice all along. A soft knock interrupted my reflection. Eleanor Weston entered, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in the years I'd known her, as if some perpetual tension had finally released. "The Richards Foundation Board approved your proposal," she announced, setting a folder on my desk. "Full funding for the Women in Finance Mentorship Program starting next quarter. The initiative, providing support and guidance to women navigating male-dominated financial institutions, had been my first major philanthropic project as CEO. Eleanor had enthusiastically joined as advisory chair, bringing decades of unacknowledged expertise into the light. "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely pleased. "Your advocacy made the difference." She waved away the credit, though I noticed the satisfaction in her expression. "The right ideas just need the right moment. And sometimes," she added with gentle irony, "the right catastrophe to clear the path." We both knew she was referring not just to the mentorship program, but to the broader transformation that had occurred in the company, in our family dynamics, in our individual lives. "Have you heard from him?" she asked after a moment, the question inevitable, though carefully neutral. "Not directly," I replied. "Sarah says his attorney requested another extension on the asset disclosure. Apparently establishing a new life in Chicago is consuming his attention." The Chicago connection was intentionally ironic. James had relocated to the very city he'd used as pretext for my professional sidelining, though without the corporate infrastructure he'd planned. The non-compete provisions in his separation agreement prevented him from contacting Weston clients for 3 years, effectively requiring him to rebuild from scratch. "And you?" Eleanor asked, her gaze perceptive. 6 months into this new chapter. Is it what you expected?" I considered the question, looking out at the harbor where evening lights had begun reflecting on the water. "It's more demanding," I acknowledged, "and more fulfilling. Having authority aligned with responsibility changes everything." "Speaking of authority," Eleanor said, checking her watch, "Richard is waiting downstairs. The foundation dinner starts in an hour." As we gathered our things to leave, I took a final glance around the office that had once symbolized my exclusion and now represented restoration. The transformation wasn't just in the physical space or organizational chart, but in the fundamental balance of power, professional and personal, that had been recalibrated through deliberate action. The woman who stepped into the elevator beside Eleanor Weston was not the same one who had poured coffee while being humiliated at a client meeting a year earlier. That woman had disappeared gradually, replaced by someone who had reclaimed not just her professional authority, but her personal agency. Someone who had interrupted a pattern stretching back generations. As we reached the lobby, I noticed my reserved parking space visible through the glass doors. The CEO's spot that had once belonged to James, to Richard before him, and now, by right of competence rather than marriage, to me. Some lessons come at a tremendous cost. But as it turned out, I was very good at calculating value, and this transformation had been worth every price paid. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.